Hello, folks. Welcome to this really exciting panel today on AI for biopharmaceutical R&D with a focus on clinical trials and really focusing on moving from theory to practice. It's an exciting time to be discussing this topic. It is an exciting topic in our industry as well. These days, you can't turn on the news at all without hearing something about AI or ML every day. It's either something about OpenAI or NVIDIA or Microsoft or companies crossing the 3 trillion company valuation and on and on and on. We're constantly hearing about how AI can do a variety of things, applications of AI in various industries, how everything is going to become AI driven. Our jobs are going to be overtaken by AI, and how in the future, AI is going to run the entire world. General intelligence, LLM, these items were not even in our lexicon, I would say even 2 years ago. Now I can ask my grandmother and she'll tell me what LLM is, or presumably will tell me what LLM is. But it's also an interesting exercise to go back and look at the 20th century predictions that people made. So if we roll the clock back, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years, and you look back at the news then, you will hear everything from, in the future, in the 21st century, schools will be run exclusively by robots. We will have every single possible computing device on our wrists, and that's how we will just make the world go around. There will be flying robots and flying firemen and flying robotic maids who take care of our homes. There will be no traffic jams, no slums, no crime, self-driving everything, etc. Now, as with everything, there's hype and then there is reality. Some of these things have happened. We've definitely seen things like self-driving cars. Some of these things have remained pure fiction, and possibly thank God for that some things have remained pure fiction. But in the latest cycle of what we're seeing, AI has had some definite wow effects, right? There is no denying the fact that you can go to something like a ChatGPT and what it shows you is truly incredible. I know some of us have already put it to use as well. So while this is happening, we in our industry are starting to think about AI and saying, what does that mean for our industry? How do we embrace AI? Are we ready to embrace AI? Is AI and ML something we can rely on? And if so, how would we bring it into and make it a reality in our operations? These are some exciting questions and exciting topics to discuss at this time. And I am joined at this time by 3 absolute top leaders in the industry who themselves, I would assume, are grappling with these problems and also tasked with putting these things into practice within each of their companies. I will mention the panel's name and then hand it over to the panel to introduce themselves, and then I will go into the next round of discussions and questions, which we will take for the next 30 to 45 minutes and see where the discussions take us. We have in the panel Chris Corsico, who is SVP and Head of Development at GSK. We have Christoph Kernen, who's the Head of Global Development and Clinical Operations at Bayer. And we have Darren Weston, also on the panel, who's Head of Integrated Data Analytics and Reporting at J&J. 3 top-notch leaders, 3 top-notch companies. But to say a little bit more about themselves, let me hand it over to Chris so that he can introduce himself, and then over to Christoph and Darren. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Badri, and welcome to everyone who's joining. Thanks for the opportunity to join today's panel. As Badri said, I'm Chris Corsico. I am responsible for development at GSK. I've been in role for the past 5 years, and prior to that, worked at a different pharmaceutical company, Boehringer Ingelheim, in various roles. As Badri noted, we are, like everyone else, looking at how best to leverage what is a fast-paced, moving technologic set of advancements to determine how we deliver a portfolio of assets across vaccines and medicines to patients in need. And I'm hoping today's discussion, we can talk through some of the topics, some of which we've actually been able to start to get traction and implement, others which hold an aspirational hope to start to give us a sense of how the industry is moving in this interesting space, while we use, and I like to call it augmented intelligence, as well as generative AI and large language models to further advance our mission. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Christoph, over to you.
Yeah, hello, everyone. My name is Christoph Grün. I'm heading up the area of clinical development and operations for Biopharmaceuticals. I have been doing this for the last 2.5 years. In clinical development and operations at Bayer, we have the end-to-end responsibility for the design and planning, as well as the execution of the clinical trial, as well as then the analysis and the interpretation of the data that we generate in clinical trials. And as such, we are constantly looking at an opportunity to make the planning, as well as the conduct, as well as the analysis of our clinical trials, faster, better. And of course, we're constantly looking at AI, machine learning, technology in the broadest sense to make sure that we achieve that. The way we're doing this today is that we're basically looking at each step and look at how technology or AI can help us to do that. Where we're not is we haven't managed, where maybe if you would have asked someone 100 years ago would have said that should be the case. Now we don't ask AI a clinical question yet, and 3 hours later I get an answer. And I have my doubts that I will actually experience that while I'm still doing this here.
Thank you, Christoph. Darren, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Badri. And hope everyone's doing well. So I'm Darren Weston. As Badri said, I head up what's called Integrated Data Analytics and Reporting at Johnson & Johnson. You can think of it as a kind of end-to-end supply chain of data and documents and systems. So everything similar to what Christoph mentioned, from the design of experiments and the creation of all of the protocols and regulatory documentation associated with that, in addition to all of the development of our data acquisition, assets, data management, all the way through that process, clinical, statistical programming, data standards, etc., as well as the management of all of the foundational systems that underpin global development, things like EDC, CTMSs, Planisware, etc. I'm also across the global development organization, sponsoring our kind of AI-assisted operations, however you want to refer to it, endeavors. And so this is a space, on a personal level. I think it was December 2022 when I first learned over the Christmas vacation, learned about ChatGPT and was pinging various leaders in my organization examples of things it could do that was blowing my mind. And so this is a space that, I've been personally engaged in for a little while, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Darren. And to round it out, my name is Badri Srinivasan. I'm head of global development, clinical operations at Novartis. I've been doing that role for about 8 years now. So obviously also very keenly interested in understanding how to incorporate AI, ML, LLM, digital, any other 3-letter acronyms that are out there into what we do, but do it well as well. So the discussion today, I think we're going to try to keep it on a more practical note, right? So everybody knows we're not going to get technical in what exactly does ChatGPT do, or how do we bring in an LLM into our environment, but very much more practical, as would be things that leaders here in this panel and beyond grapple with. And we have a few key themes that we want to explore today as well. Is AI ready for us to use? Is it in a place where we can actually start to bring it in, knowing that our industry is highly regulated, and if we make a mistake, it literally costs people's lives? Where can adoption change as we execute the trial? So when we bring it in, where should we be thinking about bringing this in? And how would things change if we do bring it in and when we do bring it in? And what is the stakeholder appetite for this kind of a change? It could be a pretty dramatic change in what we do, if all promises are to be believed out there, right? So let's start by exploring each of these themes over the next several minutes, and then see where the conversation takes us. So let me start first with where is AI, and is AI finally ready for us to use? Thinking about this in the broadest sense, perhaps is the maturity level where we are comfortable in bringing it in? Are we fine to say, let things be driven by AI? Is the broader digital landscape something that we can start to embrace much more comprehensively than before, or even just point solutions? So let me maybe open it up. I'll go in the same order that I did we did the intro. So Chris, over to you, just for your thoughts, and then we'll take it around the panel.
So as I look at this from our perspective, there's been an infrastructure investment that is necessary, and it starts with ensuring access to data and that flow of data. And for us, the reality of AI really begins with what data access do you have, how can you reuse data, and how do we build off of what were already methods in place using mathematical modeling to be able to augment how we do our trials, to either save exposure to patients, reduce the size of our trials. But as we look at the landscape, there's been some specific ways that we've been thinking about introduction of machine learning, large algorithms, reuse of data to be able to unlock some of the value that we believe that this will have across the entire aspect of running our clinical studies. So we have been looking at ways to use large language models to be able to assess how we translate documents, use generative AI to start to automate some of the documents based on content that already exists, and then go ahead and put that into a different format. The hope is actually at some point, these algorithms and models will become smart enough where they will actually start to generate unique content, but we're not there yet. We're also using mathematical modeling to be able to help us better predict where we want to put our sites, where we may be able to identify patients. And this really builds off of what was really a move in the industry, I think, over the last number of years, to start to have access to what we call real world data, to better understand where patients may reside, what site efficiency looks like, and where those patients may actually be driven into joining clinical trials. And now taking it one step further, moving beyond the site to really trying to use the technology to allow patients to remotely contribute their data in real time. I'll stop there because there's a lot more I'd love to hear from my colleagues, but those are some early thoughts about how we're trying to get traction in certain parts of the value chain that we call clinical development.
Yeah. Love the idea of remotely contributing data in real time. That sounds super exciting, super relevant. But you also touched on data access, etc. Is that kind of the thread you're picking up as well, Christoph? And how do you see this?
Absolutely, because I think what Chris already started to talk about, it's for me, I kind of always break the use of AI during the conduct of a clinical trial down in 3 different areas. One is the design and planning. Yeah, that's where data access right now is extremely important. If I understand my patient population better than I have understood them in the past, if the data I use in order to understand my patient population is recent and not a clinical trial I did 5 years ago in the same indication, that makes all the difference in the world. I mean, to give you an example, cardiovascular disease, the standard of care is evolving and improving so fast that the effect sizes are getting so small that understanding my patient population in a contemporary manner is extremely important to really find the appropriate power to define we design the trial in an appropriate way, and in the end, determine the size of the trial, which makes all the difference in the world for us. Yeah. So data access, having the right access to the right data, is extremely important to achieve that. The second thing then is using AI in the conduct of the trial. Yeah, making sure we acquire the right centers, make sure we go even in the right countries to do a trial, making sure that I use technology to acquire the data. Yeah, do it remotely. Yeah, use technology to acquire data rather than having to manually input something even into eCRF. That's the kind of things that makes it so much easier for us to run a trial. But on the other hand, by the way, creates a dilemma for us because we suddenly collect so many more data points that we somehow need to handle and monitor, by the way, as well, which then brings me to the other important part of the conduct of a clinical trial, which is the, let's say, ensure, and I intentionally do not use the word monitoring for this, but to ensure the data quality in our clinical trials, where I personally believe that AI can fundamentally change the way we do this. To give you an example, depending on what trial we're talking about, 25 to 50% of the cost of a clinical trial right now go into ensuring the quality of the data. And that is actually headcount. Yeah, it's people that literally travel around, go to a site, count pill, look at source data, yeah, and manually correct mistakes. By the way, at least from the last time I looked into it, in source data verification, we find what? 1% of mistakes, maybe 2 if I read a really bad trial. Yeah, the rest is actually just checking that everything is correct and someone traveled in order to do that. So where I'm getting with this is that I see an enormous potential to basically make this easier for the sites, make this easier for us, and at the same time produce even a higher data quality, which, by the way, will be much easier to be audited by regulators in the end as well. So that's where I personally see a huge potential for AI to make the conduct of trials easier. And I think when we're looking at large clinical trials, that is going to make a big difference. But maybe I'll stop here because I'm pretty sure Darren has a lot to say about the last part that I call, the analysis interpretation of the data, where, I personally think that AI obviously will make the big difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Darren, this can't be more relevant than what you're doing and what you're running over at J&J. So give us your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you want to take this in a different direction?
Yeah, no, I think Chris and Christoph, probably laid the foundation fairly well. I think maybe just taking a step back, I think the challenging part is the universe of opportunities is so massive, and it encompasses so many aspects. And so actually the challenging part for a lot of R&D organizations is actually trying to prioritize what could we do, what should we do. And this is where you need to look at things like, what are the tasks that get performed many, many, many times that have the potential to have an efficiency impact or a speed impact or a quality impact. So I think right now it's almost like we're children in a candy store with so many opportunities, with limited budgets for many of us, and we're trying to prioritize our efforts to the things that can have the biggest impact. And I think, Christoph, you said it quite nicely. One is, the labor that goes into managing the quality of our data. And the other one is, for most of us, identification of patients, retention of patients, enrollment periods is some of the biggest drivers of cost in R&D. So there's certain elements like that you think, okay, if we can materially make a difference there, it should downstream have a huge impact. The other piece I'd like to differentiate is between AI and generative AI as a really simplistic bucket. And the reason I separate them is there's certain areas where AI has been used for a long time. Pre-ChatGPT, there's many areas where we've been doing things. And one interesting one where the combination of AI and perhaps Gen AI come together as an example is many companies have been doing things like centralized data surveillance, whether that's for informed monitoring, whether that's for inspection management, etc. But the interesting thing is combining that with Gen AI to basically identify issues or patterns, but then generate queries attached to that is a good example where the combination between the two. So I think it's useful to separate the two, because I think in the AI space, as it relates to protocol optimization, feasibility, all these things, even document checking and all this kind of stuff, I think AI models have been around for a while and constantly being refined. And going back to the heart of your question, these are things that companies can do now, and companies are doing now in many areas, but I think they can be evolved or even enhanced by leveraging things like Gen AI. But as it relates to the Gen AI space, I think this is one where, there's, in terms of like near term, there are certain things we've done even within J&J. We've deployed, for example, all of the operational dashboards that our clinical trial teams use to monitor and manage the ongoing conduct of the studies. But not everyone who uses them is like a super technical proficient person who knows exactly how to use Spotfire and this filter and etc. And so we've actually created a system where it has the ability to ask it a plain language question. So like, how many subjects were enrolled in Canada in the last week on my trial? And boom, it can give you an answer. So things like that are really, I would say, near-term practical applications, because if you think about what Gen AI, and we've all played with it, what it does really well is if you give it some content, it can interpret that content and answer questions based on that content really well. I think the area where it's a little more challenging is when we want it to create brand new content that didn't exist before. And particularly in the R&D space, because if you think about a lot of what we're doing is cutting edge, it hasn't existed. If you ask ChatGPT 20 years ago to create you a protocol for CAR-T, it wouldn't know what to do because CAR-T didn't exist. So there's certain elements like that where we have to be cautious about what is it that he knows and what is it that he doesn't know, and how might we mitigate and manage those types of challenges. The interesting one is that particular example. I saw a great demo where someone was using a ChatGPT-like capability to consult in someone through the design of an experiment. So while it didn't know the details, it was able to consult and then go and search publications and other relevant literature. So I think, this space is massive. There's a whole ton of things that near term, I think companies can deploy. As I say, I think the combination between AI and Gen AI creates a ton of opportunity. But I think we need to rationalize the universe of opportunities and really try to figure out, what are the areas that have the highest degree of benefit, as opposed to, what could we do, what should we do? And I think that's the thing that many companies are slowly grappling with.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Super exciting, super interesting, right? I picked up on some themes here. Basically, how do we access and reuse the data well? If you can't even use the data well, then you can't even build an AI platform on top of it. It depends on that data. The design, the conduct, and the data quality, again, going back to that data, making it, let's ensure that it's highest data quality so we can then feed that back in. And Darren, I think your distinction of AI and Gen AI is super, super critical and useful. Like you said, we've automated many things before, and maybe even applied AI to it, but generative AI is a whole different ballgame and can go. And I've heard this as well. As many of you have rightly said, do not generate new content, but you can use existing content or existing data to point you in the direction. So you can take away a lot of repetitive manual tasks, but you cannot replace a clinician, for example. Which brings me to kind of the second question. And I think, Darren, you hit the nail on the head when you said prioritization. So as all of us are looking at this, areas of easy deployment we've obviously done, I think, for example, taking notes from meeting minutes and so on. And so you enable Copilot and Copilot does it. So clear, we all, I think, largely use it. Where should we start with this? So if I go with Christoph's kind of structure, should we start with data quality? Should we start with making sure it's workflow enabled? Because insights without action is maybe useless insights. Should we start with patient recruitment and work from there? Going to that prioritization question, just to dig a little bit deeper, right? where should we start? Maybe I'll change it up a little bit here. Christoph, maybe I go with you because your picture was, I'm assuming it's a lot clearer in your head with your picture in your head. So.
Yeah, so I'm actually not sure whether I can answer that question, Badri, because
Very cool.
it might be different for whatever trials you're running. It might be different where the strength and maybe relative weakness of your own organization lies. It might even have to do with the way you're set up as a development organization. Yeah, because I think consideration like what do you do in-house, what do you outsource, play an important role here as well. Yeah, I mean, so yes, and I'm going to contradict myself now intentionally. On the one hand, I am a big fan of prioritization. I hate nothing more than someone starting a conversation with, I met with this interesting startup. Yeah. And then it's all about an app that helps me exactly here in this trial, in this specific situation. Yeah. Which by the way, maybe it does. And I'm just not completely shutting the conversation down. But on the other hand, there's a huge danger in especially development organizations that are large, that people just go out doing whatever they think makes sense. Yeah. Exactly. But the amount of resources we spend on doing all that, I'm not sure it's worth well spent anytime. Yeah. So I think there is some degree of prioritization, maybe if you want to be bad, call it governance. Yeah, when it comes to innovation, that is important. And I mean, if you ask me where I'm focusing right now, I'm personally focusing very much on data quality within my organization, but that is very much driven by a lot of other factors that are happening. Yeah, I mean, so for example, we are consolidating our footprint. Yeah, I don't want to have physical operations in 35 countries around the world anymore. Yeah, so that kind of drives my focus on data quality right now. Yeah, but on the other hand, I do still think that in the inception of the trial, the design, the definition of the patient population, there is so much potential here. Yeah, that I don't think I can down prioritize that. Yeah, I have to do that at the same time as well. Yeah. So I'm not sure I answered your question. On the one hand, yes, I'm trying to focus as much as I can. On the other hand, I feel like I kind of have to be in different places at the same time.
No, it's perfect, right? This is the dilemma we all deal with. So, Chris, do you see the same?
Yeah, I do, and let me build off of what Christoph was saying, because I don't have an answer. I'll give you some insight into what we're thinking, but I don't think it works for everyone. Some of this is, where are you with your own systems, internal systems, and ability to have data flow across your organization? Some of it's, what access to data do you have, both internal and external? What gaps do you need? And as Christoph noted, areas of strength where you've done a lot of development make this a lot easier to start to implement and try to understand how you may augment what you're currently doing versus a brand new area. And then some of this is appetite for change. So our approach has been focus everyone on delivering what we have in front of us, but then start to pilot with small groups, ways to be disruptive. And that disruption starts with, can we think differently about how we generate, for example, a clinical development plan? Can we think about what mathematical modeling beyond dose could be used to change sample size, but also start to build disease models that would allow us to start to build in silico trials, digital twins, to be able to understand what we may be seeing in terms of an effect size, and then reduce the overall sample size. And it gets to how you right size then your clinical footprint, where you're looking for patients, and how you pull this together at a time in which the regulators themselves are grappling with many of the same issues. They have lots of questions, and at the top of everyone's mind is, how do I demonstrate that whatever I generate and whatever I'm doing actually can be replicated, is actually true and real as best as we can tell based on the content? And can we go back to and show them where the source data came from and the quality of that data? And so depending on where you are in that journey, your pilots may look different, but I think our big focus has been don't disrupt the entire generation of what is a very important portfolio while you start to experiment and bring in new ways of working.
But it's so there are two themes I want to pick up, and Darren, I'll go to you because it may be you may have a point of view and then come back to the others. The two themes I picked up here is, in some way, shape, or form, what is our current organization, roles and responsibilities, the way we have structured our current organization, is that fit for the AI world as we see it, number one? And number two is what you just said, Chris, which is how do we bring AI without actually disrupting the entire portfolio? Because we have to make sure we continue to deliver on the portfolio that is in front of us, AI or no AI, right? Darren, your thoughts on that in addition to the question, and then we'll go back and see the other.
Yeah. So I think, Christoph, there was a couple of points you made around, the tendency that sometimes organizations have, which is to chase some shiny object because someone at a JP Morgan conference said this was the best thing since sliced bread, and everyone said, well, we need to pilot it. So I think in this space, one of the biggest challenges is the fact that, as I said, there is this universe of opportunity, and it's actually really massive, and it affects almost every component, and it isn't just siloed to an individual function. That application in one individual function may have implications more broadly. So I think the first thing I'd call out is the need to have connected efforts across R&D. Because whether it's even the data assets or whether it's the implications of a process, these things are very rarely disconnected. And so if you've got siloed efforts going on across your R&D organization, you may end up with, in the worst case, duplication or things that don't work, etc., or they're not connected. The other one is the connected infrastructure investment, ideally to solve many problems, not one problem. So I think this is what part of the challenge is. There's a lot of vendors that have maybe point solutions, but I think some of the challenges that we need to grapple with is, are there opportunities for investment in infrastructure that solve many problems? And that's something that, again, I think each, and again, that's probably co-travels with the broader question of, should you build, should you buy, should you partner? These are all fundamental strategic positions that each company, again, has to grapple with. And the build option, I think, then leads to a separate issue, is what is the internal expertise that you have? And I think all of our, respective organizations are developing certain skill sets, but it's really hard to wrap your head around what are the skill sets needed in these organizations. Do you really need expert prompt engineers, or is it actually that you're building tools that don't require the prompt engineering, almost like GPTs in the ChatGPT world that already have that prompt engineering and RAG development, etc. So it's almost like an assistant to you, as opposed to you going in, as most of us are used to doing, going into a prompt and typing stuff. So I think that solving these things across R&D is probably one of the number one things, because even for myself, there were things being solved in other parts of our organization that was incredibly insightful, that opened the doors to a potential set of pilots and hopefully solutions in the future for our organization. So for me, as we've gone on this journey, this kind of connecting the efforts, which also then helps rationalize spend and many other really important elements.
No, thank you. Thanks, Darren. Folks, I know I just want to do a time check. People have a few more minutes. It's 51 past the hour, so I know we were blocked at 45. So let me just go for a couple more minutes and then try to wrap it up. I think the theme that we picked up again actually goes to that second part, which is the real stakeholder appetite for change. Because yes, we have to have connected, solve many problems, as Darren said. We have to make sure that we get at this from the bottom up, which is you can't just put a superficial application on top of the data quality is really bad, to Christoph's point. And as Chris was saying, we all have a portfolio to deliver. So if we were to go about this and we take it back to our companies and say, here's what we want to do, can we talk a little bit about our appetite for change? What hurdles do we need to overcome? Or is it just going to be, this is fantastic, why didn't you do it yesterday, kind of thing? Darren, you want to start? And then we'll flip it around.
Sure. So I think from what I hear, also talking to a lot of my peers, is that there is, at an executive committee level in most companies, because of, as you teed it up at the beginning, Badri, there's so much obvious potential, but the practical applications is maybe the area where it's, where we're all on a journey. So I think there's this kind of balance of excitement versus caution that I feel is prevalent across many organizations. And I think there is this clear drive that, reducing costs at speed, timelines, etc. And we can all, it's palpable in terms of the energy and the potential. But I think everyone, it's the challenge of how do you act, what should you go for, and how do you actually practically take steps on that journey. I think we haven't touched on it, but there's a separate piece around kind of like the regulatory landscape. Yeah. And, just growing, I think there is clear growing openness from agencies, particularly FDA and EMA, on accepting kind of AI augmented processes, for want of a better word, particularly in things like patient recruitment, monitoring, etc. We do see a shift there. So I think, Christoph, you mentioned around kind of data quality and changing some of the on-site practices that we currently have today that are incredibly labor intensive. I think there is more and more receptivity to that. But I think the acceptance of AI generated regulatory content, I think that's a space that's probably still in its infancy and something that requires a bit more validation. So yeah, maybe I'll just pause there and let the others kind of jump in, but yeah, just some initial thoughts.
Chris, appetite for change?
Well, I think this gets to the fact that the external world continues to evolve, and even regulatory thinking is evolving. And if companies are static, we're not going to be able to deliver our promise to patients. And that gets to understanding internally how the various groups and the current work in terms of how we're configured and the job profiles need to change. And Christoph alluded to this, and I think it's a really important point. The jobs that we're thinking about in the future way of working have to be created, and they will actually intersect areas that have been traditional in a pharma company, such as epidemiology, stats, our IT interfaces, commercial research. And this idea that data science now blends and starts to build models, and colleagues with backgrounds that don't come from pharma, but can disrupt our way of thinking, need us all to figure out how we get the cross-functional groups together to start to work together to deliver an end product, understanding that their job that they're currently in is going to look very different, most likely, in the future. And it's going to be this networking collaboration that will determine if you're successful or not. I think, I speak for us, the appetite for change is there, in part driven by what Christoph said. Every day, I think we're all bombarded in our emails with another company that has the latest, greatest tool. And what that does is it sparks a buzz within the company, with everyone asking, how do we incorporate this? And so that appetite for change needs to be funneled and then structured, and an overlay needs to be put in place to say, thank you, let's triage and let's determine where best to place it. But this evolution, I think, will also be further pushed by where the regulators are moving. And just to quickly touch on this, FDA's initiative to build a quantitative medicine organization that actually just reconfigures parts of the agency to pull expertise together, similarly to what the companies need to do to be able to look at how they're using data and how they're generating data, will allow, I think, both companies and regulators to evolve in parallel to define that new future. So it's no longer for me an appetite for change. It's how you introduce the change in a way that still allows you to focus on what needs to be done while evolving to what will be the new state.
Christoph?
Yeah, so the appetite for change is there, but let's be honest, there is no choice anyway. Yeah, so we have to change. I think maybe coming back to something you asked in the previous question, because I do think it's an important point, that is, are we organized in the right way in our traditional development model? Yeah, like if you look at it at a macro level, we're having R&D. Part of that is the clinical development part. We have medical and we have commercial. And when you look at capabilities or let's just look at the how they use data. They actually, all three parts of this organization, yeah, they generate clinical data to some extent. They interpret the results of that clinical data, yeah, and that is very much based on this, what I call the old-fashioned model of, well, you generate regulatory grade clinical data. That's what clinical development classically does, yeah. Then I guess you call it market or clinical informing data if it goes to the medical part, and then market informing data when it comes to the commercial part. But in the end, it's data that is generated. Yeah? Does it actually make sense to separate that in the future? And I think, Darren, you were going a little bit in that direction, yeah, because in the end, by the way, they all need statistics. They all need, to some extent, data management, yeah. And I foresee actually a future where you will have a large part of the organization, any pharmaceutical company, that will focus on the acquiring and generating and interpreting data. Yeah, and the profile you need to do that might be a completely different profile than the profiles that probably a lot of us have here in this panel have in common. Yeah. And I think this is going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how companies are going to change the organizational setup in order to accommodate that. Appetite for that right now, I'm not sure. Yeah, because that is a bigger discussion. I personally think we will have no choice but to do that as well.
Wow, thank you, thanks. That is a much bigger discussion, but also, as you both, Chris and Christoph, you pointed out, it's going to test the boundaries and the parameters of how much we want to change and how we want to change, right? But I know we've come to the end of this discussion. I just want to say, really nice discussion. We've kind of the excitement to adopt AI, ML, generative AI, all of that is there. Christoph, as you rightly said, we don't have a choice. We have to bring this in. It's a right thing to do for patients. There's a regulatory aspect which we have to explore a bit more. There's a change management aspect which we have to explore a bit more as well. But maybe I'll conclude there and say it is a book yet in the writing. Maybe it is chapter 1. We have another 15 chapters left to go, but we are all going to be watching each other and helping each other out as we try to make this change. So with that, huge thank you. I know we've run over, and so thank you for making and taking the extra time as well. It's been absolutely a brilliant session. Very much want to say good rest of the week, and thank you for taking the time for this session. With that, come to the end. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much.